All right, I wanted to get started with the mixing process. So here's what my main mixer, the sort of like virtual SSL mixer, looks like in Reason Studios. Obviously, we're working in different DAWs, so things are going to look way different based on what we're doing. But the skin and bones is going to be the same. So very first thing that I want to do is I went ahead and organized everything. I saved as a mix session, so I'm starting sort of a new version of this. And I organized everything, renamed everything, and sort of color coordinated some things. And I zeroed out all the faders and everything. First thing that I'm going to do is make a selection of everything, and you might have to make a group or something in FL Studio. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but as long as I make a selection of everything here, then I'm able to move all the faders at once. And I'm going to lower them like 8 to 10 dB. I'm really going to go for like 10 dB. And what this is going to do, it's going to set me up to be judicious about the boosting that I'm going to be doing, because we get in that realm where we always want to like, well, I need to hear the vocals a little bit more, so I'm just going to bump it up. Then you lose the kick drums, so you need to bump things up. Really, we want to be pulling things away, but also I know that from when I started, I have a whole bunch of things in here now, so I want to give my master a bunch of headroom. I also want to leave 8 or so. I mean, the argument can be made 8 to 12 dB of headroom on your master, so the mastering engineer has some space to work with too. So I'm just lowering everything as a starting place for my mix. Another thing that's going to come in really useful that maybe you've heard about before, or haven't, maybe you haven't and you haven't really considered this. If there is some method, whether it's the analog output style that you have, or if there's a way that you can search around on the internet and find out how to set up specific ways for you in your digital audio workstation to switch between stereo and mono outputs of things. Because when we're working with EQ, especially, it can be really useful to collapse everything out of from stereo back to mono, so all of your sources are laying flat on top of each other, so you can really deal with EQ to help prevent masking of certain frequency content. And then you pop yourself back into stereo, and even though you're potentially using all of this stereo space, so you're separating things with panning, you still might have frequencies that are going to mask each other regardless of what your pan settings are. So being able to collapse into mono is a great way to train your ears to really fix that frequency content. On my end, I've got just a button on my analog output that's connected to the speakers in my studio here, so I can just push the button and listen in mono. So that's a good way to, anyway, have that as a resource for you. Okay, so my activities here, whether or not you separate the volume and the panning as one activity and the EQ and dynamics as one, and then maybe send effects as like a different activity, I'm really going to approach this from trying to perfect each individual sound first. And perfect, I mean, I'm going to change its width. I might do the panning activity then, or I might just like change its width and then do some EQ sculpting and some dynamics compression if I need to. And I'm going to do that for each one of these things. So I'll do it a couple of times on a few channels, and then we'll call it a day. There's no need for you to see what I'm doing on every single channel. But I'm definitely going to leave the send effects until later. So I'm going to leave this section alone. But I am going to pop up and open up my EQ, so I can kind of like always have this, and I have it here checked to follow my selection. So whatever track that I'm working on, I should be able to see the EQ stuff happening. So I'm just going to start rolling through it, and I'll show you sort of the basic ways that I'm going to go about this. So obviously I see the frequency content of the electric bass sound. I'm going to remove the width because I want that bass to be hitting right in the middle. So I'm not going to pan this at all, but I am going to use low and high pass filters on pretty much everything. I'm definitely going to do a low pass. Let's see what happens with the high pass. So I'm not going to do too much. I'm just like listening to where I start to hear the sound of compromise, and then being a little bit more, well, just taking a little bit more away from the end of the frequency spectrum that it does not include this instrument. So I'm just like removing a little bit more of the high end stuff, and then I'm going to move on. Now I might have to jump back and forth between my actual song, because I know that the bass synth doesn't actually come in until the pre-chorus section. So I'm just going to kind of loop that section and go for it. So that sounds good to me, to have this like extra little boost right there. You know, we can always like to bypass this stuff. You want to do that to make sure that it's sounding better than it did before. But I kind of dig that little extra mid-range boost that I got out of that. So I'm going to keep going through and doing this and changing the width of some of these things. You know, again, like the synth sounds, especially if they're bass, like, do you want it right in the middle? I would want it pretty tight in the middle, I think. So I might, I want the synth bass when it comes in to expand from just the electric bass, but not a crazy amount. So I'm going to keep it relatively tight, but it is going to spread itself out just a little bit. So I'm going to go through that, and I might do some compression on some specific things. I'll jump over to the snare, actually, because I feel like that's where a lot of the compression stuff is going to happen. So let's listen to our snares. Now, those seem like a little bit weak in comparison to some of the rest of the kick and everything. So one thing that you might do is find yourself creating a parallel channel for a snare, and then I'll show you with just these two. So now here's the original snare, and here's its parallel channel. The parallel channel is one where I'm going to do some crazy things with it, right? I'm going to turn the EQ on, and I'm going to wind up boosting the ends of this pretty significantly. The other thing that I might want to do is compress the hell out of that parallel channel. So I'm going to find my compressor, right? Turn it on, and crank the ratio, and lower the threshold, and potentially boost this guy. So here's the original snare, and here it is with its like heavily compressed EQ high-end boosted version of itself coming in. That changes the game. And then we'll include the second snare. Listen to where it started from. Right? See how this one is like, it's like gated almost, right? It disappears so quickly. So I add this not a copy, not a parallel version, a totally different one. And I get a little bit more of like a ring from it, right? And reverb is going to help that too. But I think this is a nice little setting. So again, listen to it without that parallel version. So this is the kind of things that I'm doing. Only I'm being judicious about which things I'm going to add parallel channels to. The snare is going to be one of them. And, you know, maybe the bass or something like that. But really, I think it's just going to be the snare was the only thing that wasn't quite there yet. Or maybe the rim shot, some of that transitional stuff might get a parallel channel. But more of the same as we go. Okay, adjusting the width, doing some EQ sculpting, adding compression where necessary. Now I'm going to take this steps further, or I might add some compression to whole groups of things. I might route all my drums to a compressor and just compress very lightly there to just make sure that they all kind of get smoothed out and cohesive. But this is a good place to begin. So happy mixing on this, and we'll continue with send effects and some other special stuff. See you next time.